Yeah.
Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. This is Take 5 with Steven Travers. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer. Steven is the host of the show. And Steven, we've got a guest today, someone that you know personally. But, one of my fears in life is that at the end of my life, someone will put on my tombstone, did nothing. Today's guest is a guy that you cannot say that about all. He has so many different areas of his life that are just so fascinating to me, and we're going to get into it in just a second. But thank you first and foremost, Steven, for bringing Bill Bordley along with us today. This is going to be a tremendous ride.
Yes, thank you, Harper, and thank you, Bill. And before I kick it back to you, I think what you're looking at when you're looking at the life of Bill Bordley is the story of how a door closes and then another door opens. And that is truly the life of Bill Bordley. So let's get into this. Harper, I'm going to kick it back to you, and then we're going to get him through some of his early years. And then I'm going to start asking him some questions about the period where I knew him personally.
Absolutely. Well, William Clark Bordley, born on January 9th, 1958. Welcome to the show. We appreciate it. We're going to talk about baseball. We're going to talk about security. We're going to talk about Major League Baseball, not only as a player, but as a security analyst for everything that takes place in the league. Man, where do we start, Bill?
Well, like Steve said, go back chronologically. Baseball's given me everything, even the stuff I'm doing here today. It opened the door for a lot of things, and 80% of the business I do today is related to my baseball career. And like Steve, it's always a part of you, and it opened the door for many other things. It's amazing the way the pieces kind of fell into place, because 1976, I was drafted by the Milwaukee Brewers, and their owner at the time was Bud Selig. And that's, just fast forward after that, that's kind of the way he became the commissioner, obviously. And we had a relationship for almost 45 years. And he called me and asked me to come back to do it. And when I played Major League Baseball, the Major League minimum was $21,000. And when I met with Commissioner Selig, the Major League minimum was over $600,000. He asked me what it's going to take the job. I said, I'll be nice and just take the minimum, So
yeah, what a deal. Wait, that's the way to negotiate. Well, take us back to the beginning. You're born in Torrance, is that right? You're born and raised. Are your parents also Torranceans? Or were they come from a different part of the country and settle right there next to the Pacific Ocean?
Well, my mom grew up on a farm, one of 7 children, Catholic family in South Dakota, and the Depression hit. She lost her father when she was young, so they moved out there. My father, original roots were from Maryland, but they met out there, and and then we settled in North Torrance, which was a very prominent baseball town. I mean, Jim O'Brien was the Al Indris of Marin County. And he established that baseball program that I was really in since the time I was 8 years old. So they kind of ingrained it into the neighborhood there.
Is that your earliest recollection? Did you play Little League when you were 5 or 6 or 7? Did you have a Chico's bail bond jersey back in the day and wear yellow stirrups with a blue belt and a red hat, or was it a little more organized than that?
It's amazing how you can still remember this stuff. You just gave my birthday. I'm 67, but I remember being 8 years old, and we went out to Little League practice at that time, and the 8-year-olds playing the minors, and they lined up about 7 or 8 of us to throw a baseball to see who would be a pitcher. And I knew I was pretty good at it. I knew I could throw strikes, and I did that. And a guy named Ken Hutchins, I still remember his name. He was the assistant coach.
How about that?
He looked at the head coach. He said, "Hey, you might want to look at this guy." So that gave me the confidence, and that was the start of it right there.
How about that? Now, did you swing a 27-ounce Hillrich and Bradbury wood bat back in those early days?
Well, I got my bat right here. My first hit I got off Tom Seaver. I think it's a Hill and Bradbury 34. That's what it is.
Okay. Did you play any wiffle ball and have a neighborhood full of kids around? Were there, a bunch of different folks that you ended up beginning your early athleticism? Did you have a couple of brothers that you were able to get beat up by? Tell us a little bit about the family and how you originally got involved with sports.
Well, my oldest brother, who was 5 years older than me, he played collegiately at Loyola, and he also played in the minors there for a while. He was a pitcher as well. But getting back to the neighborhood, yeah, it was a Catholic neighborhood. Everybody had like 7, 8 kids, and so you go out there in the street and you'd be playing wiffle ball. And I remember we would play football out there, and every car that drove by, I can still remember this, we would say, this ain't a freeway, and the cars would speed off. But Chuck Norris lived in the neighborhood, and when he drove down the street, none of us messed with Chuck Norris.
No, he's not a big guy though. Chuck's not. He looks big in the movies, but he's a smaller human being. Nothing. No disrespect, but. Was he older too? He's in his 80s now, so he probably was a teenager.
He was about 25 years old when I was 8, and he's on the Republican side. And so I over the years, I ran into him, backstage with, some of the Republican, President Bush and things like that. And I always tease him about not being a Texas Ranger. I said, you're a California guy. Don't give me that.
Yeah. Come on, man. You can't wear the boots like that. It doesn't fit, and the Stetson hat. Well, you play well enough early and often to where people recognize you. But really, in my opinion, I'm thinking things started to change for you in the high school days. Talk about going to Bishop Montgomery and what those memories were like for you.
Well, I went to Bishop Montgomery, and they weren't, as I said, I grew up in North Torrance, who had the predominant, probably, baseball program in the country, them in El Segundo, but I was in the Catholic school, and I went there, and it wasn't, quite the program status that North Torrance had, but went there, and I progressed every year. I was on junior varsity as a freshman. And then my sophomore year, I was on varsity, but they had the 2 pitchers ahead of me that year were both first team all league. And you know how it is in high school, you only have 2. But one of the guys, Greg Newell, who's the son of Pete Newell, the great Cal basketball coach. He was he was kind of erratic, maybe a stereotypical left-hand guy. Well, he got kicked off. He got kicked off the team about 2/3 of the way through the season. And so they moved me into the starting rotation, and then we barely made the playoffs. We were the 32nd team in there, and we're playing it. So we got to play the number 1 team, which was El Segundo. That's where George Brett and Scott McGregor and all these guys went to. And we stood no chance. So the number 1 guy, he was a senior, and he had the senior prom coming up. So I don't know. He said, the coach came to me and says, "Hey, you're pitching." So I did, and we had them beat 1-0 with 2 outs in the last inning, and we kind of messed up a little bit, but nobody could believe that we did that. So that kind of opened the door for my confidence going into my junior year, which was 1975, and that 1975 year really took off. And as Steve played on a national championship high school team, they deemed us that 30, 40 years after the fact that we were national champions. We won the final game at Dodger Stadium, 1-0 with a hit to right field with 2 outs in the bottom of the 7th inning. So it's a great thrill. In fact, it was the 50-year anniversary was June 3rd.
Wow. Did you pitch in that championship game too?
I did.
So you pitched and you drove in the winning.
I didn't get the hit to win the game.
Oh, okay.
First baseman did.
All right, so I'm not going to give you as much NIL money as you probably would have gotten. Back in the day, they didn't have any of that. You just got a pat on the back and let's go to work. Did you consider basketball, baseball, track, baseball, football? What were the other sports that you may have wanted to play when you were in high school?
Well, this is my story, and I stick to it. I went to Bishop, and I was an average high school basketball player, but UCLA recruited me, and I wasn't a USC fan. I was a UCLA fan. I was a diehard UCLA basketball fan. And Coach Gary Adams was a baseball coach, and I knew that his office was right next to John Wooden's office. So I went down there, and they brought Coach Wooden in there to Adams was for the baseball. When I tell everybody I was recruited to go to UCLA by John Wooden, so I let that fly.
Yeah. Even though he was next door, he still was the influence, though. Gosh, yeah, what a tough time to go to UCLA and play basketball. Now that was near the end of Wooden's reign, though, right? That was just
go ahead.
about the end.
Did I lose you?
No, we're good. We got the dog for a second.
Yeah, Casey walked in, so I'm sorry
That's
about
all
that.
right.
Well, Quentin Tarantino says no scene is really true unless you have a dog walking through it.
Yes.
Well, okay, so baseball exclusively at Bishop, and then what was the recruiting process for you like outside of UCLA? Was everybody else and their brother trying to get a hold of you and to get you? I know the Brewers were also becoming interested. When did that happen for you?
Well, it all started, I had that big junior year in 1975, and myself and Frank Pastore were the two guys, and he was actually ahead of me. He was a senior, and they ended up losing in the semifinals. And so when the senior year, 1976 started, I was pretty well discovered, and we had a terrible team in 76. I knew we weren't going anywhere. But so I knew, I've been told by everybody I was going to be a first round pick. So I had a lot of colleges, coming after me in that. It was Arizona State, and the UCLA, Stanford, and those schools, So we did that. And so I was pretty much set going into my senior year. And a Milwaukee scout came to a game. I think it was like my third game of the year, and I think we lost the game 2-1, and they were the home team, so they only had 6 at bats, and I think I struck out like 15 guys, and we dropped a pop fly, and I walk off the field, and they got 2 runs out of that, and I'm walking off the field kind of depressed, and the scout for D. Fondy was the scout for Milwaukee, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, we're drafting 4th. If you're there, you want to sign?" I said, yeah, I want to sign. And then he told me, he said he doubted I'd be 500 that year on our team. So, but that's kind of, I kind of knew early in the year. And then that Milwaukee called me the night before the draft, and they told me that they knew who the first 3 picks were, and I was going to be the 4th pick.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Now you set records there at Bishop Montgomery, if I'm not mistaken, earned run average, wins, strikeouts, innings pitched. Am I missing any?
No, all those things are great and everything, but I'll tell you, the memory is, winning that final game. That's in fact, I think Bishop Montgomery had a pretty good year this year, and I think the pitcher that was there came real close to some of my numbers. He's going to Pepperdine, and my coach was saying about they're going to break your records and all that. I said, well, the only thing that really matters that you remember is, like I say, winning that CIF championship and the manner in which we did it. We were so focused on that, and it was great. High school was a tremendous time. It couldn't have gone any better. Like I say, on the back of 8 million Wheaties box after that, and then the recruiting start and all that, and kind of some funny stories on the recruiting. I remember Coach Dado came into my house when I was 17 years old, and like I say, it was a Catholic neighborhood with a lot of kids, and he pulls up in the house with his Cadillac. And by the time he even knocked on the door, he had like 12 neighborhood little kids talking to him. And he comes into the house, and, the other coaches like Coach Brock or Augie Garrido or Kendall or Adams, so they talk to you and they tell you how great you are. And I was sitting there just begging to tell Coach how great I am. And, so he's talking to my parents for like 20, 30 minutes. He doesn't even acknowledge me. And as I say, I was a UCLA fan at the time, but USC, obviously, they had it going on in the 1970s. And he turns to me finally, he says, "Tiger, do you want to become a Trojan?" And I said, "Well, Coach, I don't know. I'm here, and I might be the number 1 pick in the draft. And, I'm trying to get him." He says, "Well, Tiger, if you were going to be number 2, I wouldn't be here." So that's the way. That was the start of Rod's indoctrination. Then he turns to my parents.
Jim Larry's house.
Yeah. And then he turns to my parents and he talks to them for another 15 minutes. I'm sitting there, "Hey, what am I, chopped liver here? I thought you were here to see me." And then,
That's it.
but that's the that was the indoctrination of Coach Dato. He was a master at it. You know, he coached for $1 a year, but he had a multi-million-dollar business, very successful in all that. And you know, that's the way he did it all the way through. And I can remember when I went to SC, they have a alumni game there. And back then, you had Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau and God, all of them, Tom Selleck, John Wayne, the Trojan Band, and all the other players that used to play there. And I'm out there pitching against, and then Fred Lynn steps in the bat. And, you know, I just came from this little high school, and, you know, the place is packed, and they got the music going, the band and everything. And the announcer says, now batting, American League MVP Fred Lynn. Fred played on 3 national championship teams when he was at USC. And Dato yells out to me, he says, Billy, that's because he was only here 3 years. You know, that's so I'm out there trying to figure this all out, you know. But that was Coach's indoctrination. That's the way he wanted you to believe, you know.
Well, you beat me to the punch, Bill, by telling me that he called you Tiger the first time that he met you. I was going to ask, you know, how long did it take before he did that? Because that was his nickname for everybody, right?
And he met everybody. He knew everybody, all Hollywood. They all knew him, and they finally said to him, he finally got Tiger right when he met Tiger Woods. You know, so he knew anybody and everybody. And you know, God, I went to his funeral, and Vince Scully was doing the eulogy, and there had to be over 1,000 people there. They had Traveler there and the band and all the Dodgers and all that. And he was such a successful, hardworking guy. And one of his grandkids got up after Vince Scully got done, and everybody's saying, "Boy, when I die, this would be the way to go out." And his grandson, who was about 14 at the time, says, "My grandpa says you only got to do 3 things in life to be successful." And everybody's like, "Well, what's this?" And he says, "Number 1 is wake up. Number 2, get up. And number 3, get going." So
yeah.
That was his motto.
How about that? Wow, so simple. Do me a favor before we go over to Steven. I know you were just beginning with your SC tales that you were going to do. The Wheaties box that we're seeing off the right shoulder, it's off your left shoulder. Tell us a little bit about how that happened, because that's not a very often occurrence for a kid in high school to have something like that. Yeah, Bruce Jenner and Olympic Mark Spitz, you know, you're used to seeing those types of guys. How did they approach you, and what was that process like for you?
You know how that came? It was like senior year had started, and they were having a football practice, and I wasn't playing football, and it's on a Saturday, and I get a call from the football coach to my mom, and she says, "Hey, Bill, you know," and then the football coach is saying, "Hey, there's a guy here called from Wheaties. He wants to know if you can meet him," and so. That's what it is. And they came over to the house, and then we went out to the field and they took pictures. And I should have asked for a dime a box. I would have done all right. You know, they said it was on 8
Yeah,
million.
no kidding. They 8 million boxes of cereal, and you didn't get a dime.
Yeah, no,
again,
good
that's
memory.
our second. Stephen, that's our second NIL violation already. So
Yeah.
we're going to have to see if we can't do something about that. But what eventually got you to go, you know what, I don't need to go any further. I wanted to be a Bruin. Yeah, I could go up to Stanford. They've got a really nice program. Arizona State, they're the cat's meow, but I'm going to be a Trojan. What was that process for you?
Well, you know, like I say, USC won 6 national championships in the 1970s, and Coach Dato, like Augie Garrido, I had the chance to play some ball with him. They just take over a room, and he just had a great program. You know, you had to go there, and he always used to joke about how good a care he took care of his players. And I'm jumping a little ahead of the screen here, but when the whole draft thing went down and there was a scandal whether I'd come back to USC or not, and Coach Dato was the one who called Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner of baseball, and said, "Hey, listen, this is a hardship thing. His father's just had some heart issues, and his brother had a car accident, I was only a sophomore, so he still had a year or two of eligibility left to me, but he's the one who initiated the whole thing. And so it was still in January or February of 79, I was coming back. But the night before coming back to school, I got a call from Commissioner Kuhn that don't go to school. We're going to give you a special draft. And that's when the Giants got in there. So anyway, the negotiations went real quick with the Giants, and they gave me a record contract at that time. So I had to go back in jeans out to practice while everybody's practicing. Marcel Latchman was out there and everybody, and they circle around and I say, Coach, I just signed with the Giants for the biggest contract in the history of the game. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, Tiger, I know it's going to be a hell of a pay cut for you, but we're going to miss you. So that's the way.
Baseball,
I tell that story to Tim Leary, the UCLA or the Arizona State guys, and they just get furious. Yeah, you guys got paid for everything, So that's the personality he had, and that's the power he had, and also the goodness of his heart. He knew that, our 79 team wasn't going to be that good. He knew it was best for me. And he did that to Fred Lynn, too. Fred Lynn played on those three teams, and he got drafted in the second round by Boston. And Fred was contemplating coming back. He said, and Rod says, no, Tiger, it's time for you to go. And, 1975, he's the AL MVP.
Yeah, and got to go in the World Series. That's not a bad trade out for going your. Before we go to SC, though, please, I read about the Anchorage pilot, the Gulf pilots, whatever. What was that experience like for you? Did you learn how to catch steelhead while you were there?
Oh my God! I take my kid up there. We go up there fishing. My kid catches 185-pound halibuts up there.
Wow!
And that thing was really kind of weird because that's great caliber ball up there. And 1976, like I say, Augie Garrido was at Fullerton, and nobody really knew who Augie Garrido was at the time. And they sent me some stuff, and I really didn't follow up on it much because, like Steve, I don't know, Steve, it wasn't that much bigger than, say, St. Mary's at the time. Augie had just started taking over, and I didn't really, give it much interest. So Justin Dato set me up with Dave Van Gorder, who was our catcher on the Anchorage team, and I kind of walked into a hornet's nest because, Augie remembered I didn't do much for him at Fullerton. So I didn't play a lot on that team. It was a great team. We had Mickey Hatcher and they had like Scott Sanderson. It's great quality. I learned a lot, but my God, Augie was just him and Rod share a lot of passion for the game and similarities, but they're different in other ways. And I did have the chance to become pretty good friends with Augie before he passed away, and spent some time with him in the College World Series. And great coach. I tell you what, he was the man. Might have been the only one that Coach Data was really, I don't want to say scared about, but he said, you got to watch it. That guy's on everything, and he was. He's very, very thorough. And he would have been a great. If he'd have followed if Coach would have followed, Data would have followed like John Wooden did and left in '78. Augie would have been a ideal of fill in there, and I know he had a lot of ties to USC at the time too. So.
Wow, yeah, woulda, coulda, shouldas, I guess, right? But anyway, so you go to SC, your freshman year. Any experience there that you go, man, I really learned how to pitch, or I really learned how to develop my curveball, or was there anything that helped you to focus on the eventual? The 78 team ended up being great. What happened before then that helped make you a better player?
Well, when I went to USC 77, we started fall ball. Marcel Latchman was a godsend. He was the pitching coach, and he ended up, going to the Angels afterwards. But like I said, I went to just a little Catholic school, and I just knew how to throw a fastball and do that. But Latch really, he ran the program in that fall ball and really taught me a lot. We're still good friends to this day, and it really that's a big jump from there to the Pac-8 at the time. And Latch was tremendous and taught me so much about the game that really got me going. The only thing that's frustrating about 1977 is I really do think we were the best team in the country that year too, and we lost the final game of a regional to a team that we'd beaten like 16-0 and 7-0, and we had 6-3 lead in the ninth inning, and then we played over in Hawaii, and it was just we really left the title on the table, but it did kind of motivate us in '78, and we weren't going to make any chances in '78.
Greg
You always think about the one that got away. That's the way it works.
Yeah. Greg Maddux was asked once, he said, what was the toughest level of baseball for you to play at? He said, high school. In the interview, he says, high school? How on earth what are you talking about? Why would high school? He goes, it's easy because the kids swing at everything.
Yeah.
And so there was a difference. That taught me something. Did Renee teach you things in between the ears as well as from a technique and a follow-through standpoint and what your leg lift was going to be and how far you spread your legs apart when you land and plant? There are certain things that are important to your skill set in terms of your motion and your kinesiology. But what between the ears did you start to learn that made you a better pitcher, a guy that can really outthink the batter and be a better pitcher and deliver a better offering that's going to help you and your teammates?
Yeah, no, Marcel walked me all the way through the whole process from the fall ball, your bullpens, to analyzing, your pitch selection and your obviously your fundamentals and your mechanics, all that, and also was very studious during the games. He told you the next day, but he wasn't one of these guys that, was all over your every action. He allowed you the independence to think and let your stuff work for you. But there was three Latchmans. There was a Bill Latchman, a Marcel Latchman, and a Renee Latchman, and they all coached in. Latch coached it was a big league manager there for a while, in addition to the pitching coach.
Yeah, one of my buddies that walked on at SC, Renee's the one who pulled him off to the side. He says, "Hey, come here, kid. You've got really fast hands. I think we can develop you." And so he owes so much of his baseball legacy to what Renee Latchman was able to do. 78, tell us what that was like for you. What a year.
Well, yeah,
what a great time to be a Trojan, Bill. It doesn't matter what the sport was. Traveler was getting run all over the campus back in 1978.
Yes, no, we had, and that was a great, not only the baseball but the football. The SC was the place to be back then, and we got off to a little slow start, maybe, but I think we were 7-4 out of the gate, but then we went 47-5 after that, and we went 27-2 the last 29 games of the season, and one of those losses was the only time we lost to UCLA in the 2 years I was there. The last game we played them, my brother had a car accident. I didn't pitch in that series, and we lost 9-8, but we had won every other game. So we lost that one game, and then we lost a Tuesday night game to Santa Barbara or something like that. And we were playing Texas, all of them, Arizona State multiple times. And our schedule was, but that team was just loaded, and we came to play, and we were not going to be denied.
Dave Hostetler, Dave Engel, I'm looking at Chris Smith, Tim Tolman, all had major league experience. You, of course, is it Jeff Schladinger? Am I saying that correctly?
Schladinger, yeah.
Jeff, I mean,
Chris Smith.
You had 5 or 6 guys. Go ahead.
Well, we had Van Gorder, Hostetler, Engel, Schladinger, myself. Bobby Mitchell wasn't on that team, but he played too. Bob Scooby played briefly in the big leagues, as did Tim Tolman. But in addition to that, every other guy, played at least AAA, and it was just Arizona State had the big names like Horner and Brooks and Bando and those guys, but we had all the way across the board. We had all the hooks. In fact, Dave Hostetler, I was his best man in his wedding. He lives right here in Texas with me. I see him all the time. And then, of course, there was the infamous, or I say famous, Anthony Munoz. He was on that team, and he's my son's godfather, and he's some of the funny. I'll tell you the one story about Anthony is he still laughs about this. Is we were playing UCLA, and it was the last game of the season, and UCLA's back then you had to win the league to get to the playoffs. and UCLA, this was their last game of the year, and we were going to the playoffs. And so the crowd's kind of mellow on a Sunday at Dado Field. And we're leading like 7-2 in the 7th or 8th inning. And then all of a sudden, Anthony gets called into pitch. And I don't know if you've ever seen Anthony in his baseball uniform. You could Google it and see Anthony Munoz baseball. You'll see him at bat. But he runs out to the mound at 6'7", 300 pounds, and he had the big hair and the little hat on the head, And he's such a competitor. He must have taken his 8 warm-up pitches in about 15 seconds, And when he ran out to the mound, the whole audience got as quiet as a Augusta putting green. I mean, they just, what the hell is this? Anthony runs out there, and there's stone silence. And I'll leave the whole word out, but UCLA dugout yells, and his number, he took his football number out there, which is number 77,
Yeah.
And he runs out there, and there's stone silence, and somebody from UCLA yells out, "Hey, Munoz, why don't you put a F and 4 between those 7s?" So 747.
A little bit of respect due to the man, and nobody wants to make him angry, right?
He got a lot of respect. No.
But you got to play with a Hall of Famer, and you didn't even know it, obviously. I mean, he had a great career ahead of himself. There's a picture of him. Even the helmet looks like one of those little helmets that you would give to the kid at Dodger Stadium there for
the guy in the background is a 6-foot Augie Garrido.
That's all. Yeah, that's cool.
Wow. He's 6 foot. I mean, so he's unbelievable.
Now, was that just a thing? You said you're still friends with Anthony. Was that just, hey, it's something I've always wanted to do. Coach Dado, could you work something out for me? I'm on a football scholarship. I won't cost you a penny in terms of, a scholarship or whatever. Can I try out for the team? How did that work?
No, Anthony was a legitimate baseball player. He was all CIF in 3 sports: football, basketball, baseball.
Yeah.
There were some of those guys on the football team that just wanted to get out of spring football practice, like Mosey Tutupu and that they would come out and do that. But Anthony was a legitimate, player. And I remember we tried out for the Southern California high school team, and the tryouts were at Dado Field, and they must have had 150 kids out there. And Anthony, I didn't really know him that well then. I just knew of him. And he was hitting balls out of Dado Field in batting practice, left and right. But no, and then they made him a pitcher. And I remember we played down here in Texas, and they always say Texas, everything's bigger in Texas. And Anthony comes out to pitch, and they're yelling at Dado about him. He said, "Where'd you find this guy?" Rod says, "We didn't find him, Tigers. We captured him."
Yeah. Sounds like a Jim Murray article. He wasn't scouted. That's what he said of Frank Howard. He wasn't scouted. He was founded.
Yeah. I walked past Frank Howard once on the field. I couldn't believe how big that guy was.
Yeah. Harper, let me jump in here. I have a couple of observations, if you will. First of all, you mentioned Bob Scooby. I was in spring training with the A's in 1982, and he was with I think it was Milwaukee, and it was at Phoenix Municipal Stadium, and he made what I think was the greatest catch that I ever saw in my life. It was just a spring training exhibition game. It was absolutely unbelievable. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about Anthony Munoz in 2022 when I met him and you introduced me to him. But our mutual friend Phil Smith, who was a pitcher at USC, and I think when you were the pitching coach, he said when he made a recruiting trip, he met Anthony Munoz at a game, and Anthony, for whatever reason, was in street clothes, sitting in the stands with a cowboy boots, a cowboy hat, and that whole persona. And Phil just looked at him, and he was already in such awe. He thought all USC baseball players looked like that. Like they were just all just larger than life. And that is really what USC baseball was like at that time. But let me jump back just a couple of years to when I first became aware of you, Bill. And I had a teammate named Frank Ferroni. And Frank was on our show just a couple of weeks back with our mutual friend Dave Weatherman, talking about the 1979 Cal State Fullerton Titans. And in 1976, Frank was probably the best left-handed pitcher in Northern California. And you were the best left-handed pitcher in Southern California, if not the whole country. But you guys played against each other in the North-South All-Star game at Anaheim Stadium. And I remember Frank coming back from that game. I said, Frank, what was it like? And he was talking about this guy named Bill Bordley and how stylish you were and how hard you threw. And so that was when I first became aware of who Bill Bordley was. And then I hear, well, this guy Bordley, he's been drafted by Milwaukee, but he's going over to the University of Southern California to play for Dado. And of course, that made a lot of sense. So around this time, there was an umpire in the Pac-8. His name was Roy Roth, and he had also umpired in my high school league. And he had umpired in the Pac-8, as well as he'd done spring training exhibition games. So he had seen a lot of pitchers. And I said, hey, Roy, what do you know about Bill Bordley? This is what Roy Roth, an umpire and a scout of St. Louis Cardinals bird dog, who later got me signed with the Cardinals. So he knew baseball. This is what he said. He's better than Koufax, end quote. I said, better than Koufax? He goes, yep. And he says, I've umpired with Koufax in spring training. I've seen this guy is the best pitcher I've ever seen. So this is this is how I've been introduced to who you are. And of course, we see you in 1977. You're 14-0, first team All-American. In 1978, you lead your team to a national championship. You'd already played for Augie Garrido with the Anchorage Glacier Pilots. Harper has already asked a little bit about that time, and you talked about, I was going to get to 1979 when you signed with the Giants. We've gotten into that. But you then make your debut with the Giants in 1980. And my friend Walt Wellsfree, I think you know him. He was at that event at USC a couple of years ago. He's a walk-on pitcher at USC in the early 80s. He wanted me to mention this because he was at Candlestick Park when you made, I believe it was your debut, but it was a matchup between two Trojans, Tom Seaver pitching for the Cincinnati Reds, Bill Bordley for the San Francisco Giants at Candlestick Park. Talk about that game, if you would.
Oh yeah, I remember the reason I got called up because John Monofusco got in a fight with Dave Bristol, and Bristol punched him out and count at a big shiner. And so they sent him down to the minors, and I get a call from the AAA manager, Rocky Bridges, who's a dear friend. Great. I couldn't have had a better minor league coach. He said, how soon can you get to Candlestick Park? And I said, what are you talking about? I said, no, let me come by the park and pick up all my stuff. He says, no, don't worry about that. We'll mail it up there. Just get up there. So I got up there and I didn't pitch for a while. We were playing the Dodgers. And I'm getting off. Well, I won't get into that. I'll get into that later. But anyway, so then the debut was against Seaver and the Big Red Machine, and they had drafted me out of college, and there was a big scandal on that. And the funny thing is, Anthony Munoz had gone through a big contract dispute with the Cincinnati Bengals too. So we were two Trojans that when I went back after this to Riverfront to pitch, they were booing Anthony and me at the same time because we were on the field together. But we're playing the Reds, and I had pitched against Seaver in the alumni game at USC in 1970. That was that game in 1977. He was pitching for the alumni, so I knew a little bit of that. But you do the game, and like Steve, you were a pitcher your whole life. You're used to that. But the scariest part of that whole game was, my God, I got to come up here and hit. And I was a pretty good high school hitter, but I hadn't hit in college or the minors. And so I haven't hit since the time I was 17, and now I'm 20, 21. and I'm facing Tom Seaver, and Johnny Bench is catching. So I come up in like the second or third inning, saying, that's when the adrenaline really got to me. And I said, I'm going to take a pitch here just so I don't look like an idiot. But it was a great memory. We won the game. And the thing I'll remember about the most of it, I came out in like the seventh or eighth inning, and I'm icing my arm in the clubhouse, and Willie McCovey is on his last year there, and the two locker rooms at Candlestick are right next to each other. So Seaver comes into our locker room, and I got my arm in ice on the table there, and I'm talking to Willie McCovey, and Seaver sits down, and I'm like, oh my God, And so I just kept my mouth shut, but I'm sitting here with three guys. Seaver was kind of down that day because he'd been struggling, but he was real cordial, and I did get a hit off him too. So that's good. So,
did you not hit a home run off him, or am I incorrect?
No. I hit a single. If I had any speed, it would have been a double.
Okay. For some reason, I thought you hit a homer.
How cool is that? This is your first game, Bill?
Huh?
Bill, this is your first game. You get a hit off Tom Seaver, and you end up pitching at Candlestick. That's a nice little memory that you get to keep for the rest of your life.
That was a big red machine, and my parents were up there, and it was just
what was the score of the game, Bill?
6-2, something like that.
And you were the winning pitcher.
Yes, yeah, 6.
Okay,
yes.
and we can talk more about that, but I want to stay on a theme of my personal memories of you during this particular time. Unfortunately, you injured yourself, and you were trying to recuperate. So I play into this period of time. This is right, I don't know, 1980, 1981, right around this period of time. And you were playing for the Giants. I believe you had a cousin named Pat Finley, if I remember, and I knew this person, and he lived in Larkspur. And if I'm not mistaken, through Pat, you had decided to live in Marin County during this period of time when you were with the Giants. And so there was also a pitcher at USC named Mickey Meister. And why don't you tell me the story about how Rod Dado asked you to recruit Mickey Meister in 1978. You had talked to me about that a few days back. It was a really great story. So why don't you describe that?
Yeah, what I remember about that is like June 9th, 1978, we won the national championship. And then I came home. I was not going to go to Alaska that summer because I knew I was in a great position for the January draft and had nothing to gain by going. So Coach Dado got me working at his Dart Trucking there, and he called me at work, and it was pretty hard work. You're loading refrigerators and stoves, and you get like 13 minutes for lunch or something like that, and none of the people there had ever seen Rod Dado, but he says to me, hey, there's this. He says, Billy, where are you at? And I said, well, I'm over at your Dart storehouse. He said, oh, I'll be over there. I got to talk to you. So he comes over, and they see the Cadillac come in the old area there, and I go over and talk to him, and he asked me to say he got this pitcher coming from Marin County. He says, can you go pick him up at the airport? I said, sure, I'll do that. He said, yeah, he's coming with his dad. He says the kid's a moose, and his dad's even bigger than he is. So I waited by the baggage claim. I saw these two guys come out, and I first met Mickey then, and that would have been in 1978. And then I ran into him a little, as you say. I was doing rehabilitation in Marin County with that David Hennessy. Satch Hennessy was the Giants, put me in contact with him for doing rehabilitation. And then Mickey would come out there, and like you say, Steve Campagna was there. He would
right.
And we'd go through that.
That was where I was leading to, because I heard that Mickey was training with Satch Hennessy, and Satch Hennessy was not a really big guy, but he was had once been named world's strongest man in his weight class, which was probably about 150 pounds, 160 pounds. He was a renowned strength trainer, a world-class strength trainer. So I go over to Marin Catholic High School, and I'm actually looking for Meister. And I don't see Mickey, but I see Steve Campagno, who was a high school teammate of mine and a great guy. And I see Satch Hennessy, and I see Bill Bordley. I can recognize that's Bill Bordley. And I go to Campagno. I said, "Is that Bill Bordley?" And he goes, "Yeah." So this is when you and I meet. We shake hands and we're talking. And at some point, Hennessy's going, "Enough jawing, you back to work." And I'm telling you, Harper, the workout that Satch Hennessy put Campagno and Mr. Bordley through was as strenuous an off-season conditioning workout as I've ever seen. And I mean, these guys were just sweating bullets, and they were just going at it as hard as they possibly could. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough for Bill to rehabilitate himself into the big leagues. So let me get to the next part where I know Bill, because this is right around the time that I'm finishing my professional career and I'm transferring to the University of Southern California, a place where I had originally wanted to play. I had been recruited as a recruited walk-on. I'd gotten a scholarship to another school. I'd gone into the minors. Now I'm finally there to finish my last 2 years of college. And this is the time, Bill, in which you were the pitching coach for Rod Dato. So tell me about how Rod Dato got you to become the pitching coach, what the circumstances were around that period of time.
Well, I went back. As I said, I played just my freshman, sophomore year at USC, and I was like 2.5 years away from graduating. But unfortunately, I made enough money playing ball, and I could take a couple of years off to go back and get my degree. And Coach helped on that. He said, "Hey, Tiger, could you be the pitching coach?" And I said, "Well, yeah, and I was taking about 20, 22 units because I just wanted to graduate. I was like 26 years old, and I wanted to get it going. But I said, yeah, and I did it. And well, I'll tell you, they had Phil Smith, like you say, he was on that team. Sid Higgins and Randy Johnson was on that team. Jack Del Rio was the catcher. Mark McGuire was the first baseman, and he used to be a pitcher. But that team had the talent. If Randy Johnson would have been anywhere near what he turned out to be, I don't think Fullerton would have won that national championship in '84 because they had the horses. They were very similar to our 1977 team. And like I say, we had good hitters. McGuire was the best college hitter I ever saw. And when I saw him, I had spent 5 years in the dugout traveling with the team on the injured list. And I saw every big league hitter there was in the National League, right from the dugout, Smith and Foster and all. And when I saw McGuire about a third to a half of the season, I said, "You got to be kidding me." I mean, Fred Lynn had the school record with like 15 home runs, and McGuire was going to get like 27, 29. And they were all going to the opposite field. He wasn't a dead pull hitter like he was when he got into the pro ball, but he was just unbelievable. And I'd never seen anything like it. And then RJ, he needed a lot of work. The thing that got him with him was, he's 6'10", and he would land on his heel. And Nolan Ryan's the one who actually helped him make that adjustment. As Randy told me this about a year ago, he landed on the ball of his foot, so that would get the downward trajectory, and he got control of his stuff. And the rest is history. He might have been better than Koufax with the stuff that he had. I mean, Randy Johnson was unhittable when he was on. But I enjoyed working for Coach. And then, like I say, I was in a hurry to get in, and coaching. I just really didn't want to do that for a living. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And but I thoroughly enjoyed the association once again with Coach Dato. And
Bill, if I can interrupt, I'm sorry, Steven. Just what was that like for you, going from the majors and going back to college to get your degree? I love and respect you for that. But was there a humility that's also involved with, what do I got to do with the rest of my life? I don't even know. I better get my degree. And while I'm there, I'm going to coach for a few hours a day, and I'll try to occupy my time there. But what was your life's ambition like after the Giants and the career in the majors was not going to work out for you because of the injuries?
Well, there's an old expression, education's always wasted on the young. And when I went back, I was a straight A student, and I was taking 22, 24 units and coaching. Because, when I went through as an athlete, you just kind of take it that way. But people say, how did you get over it? And I said, I had to get over it. I mean, I used to throw, as Steve was saying, hard, and I had 3 arm surgeries, 2 arm surgeries and a leg surgery. And, you know, I couldn't hit 86, 87 miles an hour. And my other secondary pitches were never that dominant. I knew it was over. I mean, I just knew that the at-bats that I was throwing, the guys were not intimidated by it. So, the baseball gave me everything. And so going back to school and coaching and all that it was a good 2 years for me. I took summer school. I did everything to get it over with, but I was driven, and it kind of opened the doors going in to what.
Did Frank Joe perform the surgery? If I'm not mistaken, you were the 4th of the Tommy John surgery. 4th. I mean, there's Tommy himself, and then 2 others in between where you had your surgery. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was up in that thing. I know Joe Sambita was right in that same thing, and back then it was a major surgery as opposed to now. And I remember going in for the surgery, and they had to take a ligament out of my Achilles and transplant it into my arm. And you wake up like 2 days later, and you're puffed out, and you got blood everywhere, and they're keeping you like this. And I'm in the VIP part of the hospital, and I really trying to figure it out like 2 days later, and I hear this clicking of a guy coming at me, and he gets to the front of my hospital room, and he turns over real quietly, and he can barely move, and he says, "Boy, we'd have a hell of a race, wouldn't we?" And it was Walter Matthau. He had just fallen on the movie Buddy Buddy with Jack Lemmon, and I had seen him at the alumni game. So years 77. So
sure.
So, but I was sitting there. I'll always have that memory of. Then we ended up watching. We ended up watching a giant Dodger game, and Vin Scully said something about me being in the hospital there, and Walter Matthau's driver was Mike Lacoste, a pitcher's dad. So I was talking.
Bill, that you bring up Walter Matthau. So we had mutual teammates, Jim Connor. Jimmy is actually one of the kind of a rare athlete in that he won a national championship in his senior year in high school, which was Redwood in 1977, and was on a national championship team as a freshman with the Trojans in 1978. And I once asked Jim how he ended up at USC, because he had an older brother who played football at Stanford, and he was a straight A student. I just thought, he was from Northern California, I thought he would go to Stanford, and he goes to USC. Of course, he was better in baseball. That was his best sport, so that was probably made a lot of sense. But he said he was at one of those alumni celebrity events that you had described earlier, and he said, "I'm sitting in between the odd couple, Walter Matthau on my left, Jack Lemmon on my right, and John Wayne is writing Traveler. And Matthau and Lemmon are just giving me the third degree. You're going to SC. You're going to accept the scholarship to play here, right? You're going to be a Trojan, right? I mean, you don't want to go to Stanford." I mean, he made it look like those guys had just made it impossible for him to make any other decision. So, but before we kick back to Harper, if you would, talk to me about this event at Shea Stadium where you meet Secret Service agents, and the idea first comes to you to be in the Secret Service. Tell us when that was and how this came about.
Yeah, I think I was on the disabled list. I was like 81 or 82. And we're playing the Mets at Shea Stadium, and George H.W. Bush was the VP at the time, and he's a big baseball guy. He went to Yale. He played in the College World Series in 40, and he came in there, and some of the Secret Service guys were in there, and I just started talking to them, and they got cards, and I always had a kind of an interest in investigative work, but at this point in time, I'm still focused on playing baseball. And so that was the introduction to having a contact with the Secret Service. So I ended up getting my degree in like 1987. and 86, and then I went up to back to the Bay Area. But then it took about 3 years background check. Knock on wood, I got through it, and that was, they helped open the doors to get the opportunity to get with the Secret Service, and I enjoyed that. The service is completely different than when I went through. I've been out of there for 15 years, but when I was in there, I did mostly investigative stuff, and I was in the polygraph, and I traveled the world on all that stuff. So I enjoyed that. It's a whole different job right now, and I don't know if I'd really be that interested in the way it's structured as it is.
You know Dan Bongino?
I know of him. Yeah, he wasn't there. He was on the president's detail after me, but he didn't stay with the Secret Service very long. He did go to they call it PPD, Presidential Protection Detail, and even when Obama was there. I left in right when Obama was coming in. I left in January of 2009, and I think he was inaugurated in January of 2009. But I was on President Clinton's detail. But I knew of him, and yeah, he's he like I say, I think he was only an agent for like maybe 5 to 7 years. I'm not sure.
Right.
Well, describe that process then, if you don't mind us going there with that, because this is a certain part of, I'm going to call it the Secret Service is a secret world. How can there are certain things that we know that you can't share. So if you can, please do, and if you can't, just let us know. But 2 years of background check. So what was the process like? Is there an application that you filled out to say, hey, I'm interested, and then you had to wait? Or did they give you some information every now and then to let you know, hey, we're mulling this over and there's some process that we need to do? By the way, go on and live your life. Don't hold your breath for us to make our decision. Explain the process to somebody who's really not very familiar with it.
Well, this was like when I went through, it was like 86 to 88. And, you take a polygraph examination and they do a very thorough thing. And if you did anything back then, I mean, you couldn't do drugs or anything. And, the Giants, when I played, there was a big drug scandal throughout baseball, and a lot of the Giants were involved in that. And I got interrogated on that pretty hard. Of course, then you got to take a polygraph test to pass. So I did that. So
right.
Very, very thorough. And then, and then even when you're on, my God, they come into the neighborhood after 5 years, and neighbors that you don't even know. Hey, that guy down there, they wonder if you're in trouble or something. But
sure.
But I did it. And, but yeah, it was very, very thorough. And as I say, I once I got on, I really liked the investigative side more. And I was fortunate to get into the polygraph program, and I traveled the world doing polygraph tests on people who had access to threats against the president throughout the world. So I saw baseball showed me the country, and Secret Service. I've been to over 80 countries. I mean, I saw the world. My wife I met when I was in Russia, when I was the attaché over there. So.
Bill, one of our viewers, Howard Gibeon, asked me to ask you a question, which was how realistic was the movie In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood?
It was okay. That one wasn't bad. I enjoyed watching that. The one that's really kind of funny is I was on Air Force One. We were coming back from Pakistan or something like that, a long flight, and the movie Air Force One was on at the same time. So I don't even think it had gone public yet, but we're watching the movie Air Force One from and President Clinton comes to the back, and if you saw the movie, I guess
Harrison Ford, right?
Harrison Ford escaped through the back. So President Clinton says, "Hey, you guys never told me about that hatchback." So I enjoyed those. That was a good movie. That and of course Air Force One.
Okay, take me back. You had mentioned a moment ago the process, and you've received a letter. Is it a phone call? Is it a knock on the door? Who tells you you're in? You can begin on Monday.
Well, I had almost given up because, in fact, I moved back to the Bay Area. I was living out over in Alameda, and I was working with a friend. I went to school with a finance position at a bank there in the city on Montgomery Street. And it had taken forever. And then they finally got it. And I had applied out of the Los Angeles office at the time when I was finishing up at USC. So then the San Francisco agents got wind of it. They said, hey, this guy's a former Giant. We got to get him up here. So they got into a little bit of a turf battle between he should be here or no, he should be in LA. But LA won out on that. And so I ended up down there.
I would imagine, Bill, that because your baseball background was unusual, I would imagine many of these Secret Service agents are former military or former law enforcement at the local level. So I guess they probably needed to do a little more background check on you than they would on these other guys who, let's say, pass background checks to be in the Marine Corps or something of that nature.
Yeah, no, I definitely was an outlier. Like you say, most of them are extensive military background, and also some police, they try to stay away from the police background a little bit, but it was mostly a lot of military. And I had never really shot a gun when we went to the training down there for 6 months. And the first couple of shootings weren't good, but I got good at it, and I enjoyed it, But and the same thing happened when I lived in New York. I lived in Connecticut, and everybody there was on Wall Street. I was the only guy in the neighborhood that was working in a security position, So I've always been kind of the outlier where we lived.
Bill, there are football times where in training camp, every guy says, what on God's green earth am I doing? All my friends are at the pool. They're hanging out at the movie. They're watching Air Force One and air conditioning, and I'm out here practicing 2 days. Did you ever have a day, or were there several days during your training, that 6-month period, that you got into your own mind and said, what the heck am I doing?
Well, it was hard work, but I really wanted to do it. And I was new at it. Everybody else had some type of training. But I enjoyed the whole thing. And then when I started in LA from 88 to 93, and as I said, I got in the polygraph program, and then they moved me to headquarters in DC from 93 to 95. And then I went to the president's detail from 95 to 2000. But one of the hardest thing is when I got done with the president's detail in 2000, they were going to assign me to Germany, but I had to learn the language. And I lived there. Oh, I know. I was 42 years of age when and they sent me to that Monterey up there, and I really wanted to learn it, so I put full into it. But it really helps when you go over there and live in the country and you do it. And so when I did that, the first 3 months, you start at the lowest level. On Saturdays, I was watching German cartoons because they start at that level, that. So I got good at it. But one of the funniest things, and I'm only there for like 2 years, and the director of the Secret Service is over there on the president. I think it was Clinton had come over there, and they had to fill the Moscow, Russia one, and the director asked me to go to Moscow, and I said to him, "Hey, listen, I just learned German. I can't learn Russian yet. I got a break because President Putin was fluent in German, as is his wife at the time, and so you have to get a State Department at least to score a 2+, which is pretty good to get a foreign assignment. But they cut me a little bit of slack because the President Putin spoke German. And if you'd have told me when I was at Candlestick Park that 20 years later from after there I'd be speaking to the president of Russia in German, I didn't think that would be a possibility. But
was close.
Yeah. And I remember we came out to President Putin and his wife came out to Crawford, Texas here. This was This is like in 2002. So I come out there, and Mrs. Putin wanted to go shopping. And so she leaves, and this is before you got to go by what's on the radio traffic. And President Putin was at the tarmac at Love Airport base here, and he wanted to leave, and she was still shopping. And I was just getting married at the time, and I had Mrs. Putin in the back of the car, and I said to her, and they were having an argument with the President Putin on that about getting back there. And I tried to throw international humor in there, and I said, "Keine Problem, die Frau ist dem Chef," which means no problem, the woman's in charge. And she looked at me with these steely eyes, and she says, "Nicht bei uns," and that means not with us. And I said to my wife, I said, "That'll be the last time I try international humor." And she says, "The worst thing you can do is embarrass a Russian woman about their man." So I laid off the international humor.
Did you pursue the presidential assignment, or did they pursue you, or was there a little bit of both? How does that work?
Well, like I say, I really got into the investigative side and the protection side. If you really want to be advanced and go in there, you got to do it. But when I got to the LA office, the guy in charge, the special agent in charge, they call him an SAIC. He was a Chicago athlete guy, and he liked me a lot. And so he was out there in LA when I was doing my polygraphs, and then he got me to go to headquarters in the polygraph position. And then it came time to go to the protective detail, and everybody, they really want to get to the president's detail. That's what to be honest with you, I just really wanted to stay in the area I was, but he insisted that I go to the president's detail. And so I did, and great memories, traveled the world, but it's a young man's job. And I did that from age 37 to 42, traveled everywhere, saw just unbelievable things.
Bill, what can you tell us about the Stanford detail when Chelsea Clinton was there? I don't need you to go into tell any tales out of school, but that's an interesting detail, handling the children or the child of a presidential couple.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you saw that because this went on ESPN, but Chelsea Clinton went over she just graduated high school, and she and two girlfriends were doing a tour all through Europe. And I was on the president's detail, but I was assigned to the first lady detail. And so I got assigned as just a working hump to go all the way through Europe with her. And this is, like I said, this is 1996. And she's there. She went into, I guess we call it a disco or nightclub, till like 1:30. And she was only 17 at the time. She wasn't drinking or anything, but our friends there. So we're walking back out of the disco back to the hotel, which is about, 3/4 of a mile. And these two paparazzis come up to Chelsea, and they start, and this was about 6 months after Lady Di had just had Lady Di, I think it was 6 months after. But it was, so they started, not taking no for an answer and all that, and getting in her and grabbing her. And Chelsea and her friend are looking at me like, what are we gonna do this? These guys just wouldn't listen. And we turned the corner, and so I moved the guy out of the way, and we got back. And so the next day in the paper, I see this. I get a knock on the door where I got to go to the embassy there because the police there it's like an international incident now. And then they put in, I remember the Italian paper, they put in there La Guerrilla. I read the paper and I see my picture in there. They got me doing that. So Chelsea called her dad, who was in Africa, and he talked to the ambassador and got me out of that interview. And that's where Mrs. Clinton said, "We want you to be in charge out at Stanford." So I put my
situation.
And then the ESPN ran a story on that former Giant arrested in Italy, so that's how I got there.
Right.
Is the presidential,
go ahead.
Presidential detail, is that like at the top of the food chain? Is it a prestigious or honors position? Does it pay more? What are the reasons that a guy would want to have that? Is that the top of the food chain, Bill?
It's probably career advancement more than anything. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, if you do that, you've touched the base for promotion and things like that. Because back then it was only you did the president or you did the vice president or former presidents. Now I everything I read now, everybody's being protected. I just don't see how they do it with the manpower. But
Yeah.
So let me get to the year 2000. And this was a pivotal time in my relationship with you, Bill. I had known you during that time when you were working out with Steve Campagno and Satch Hennessy. And I don't know if you really even knew me when I was at SC. I did coach the JVs for a year, but I was mainly just a fan in the stands with my good friend Terry Marks. So I went to every game. I did not miss a game, every game. Every league game, every non-conference game, and every game that was anywhere in the Los Angeles area, at Pepperdine, at UCLA, at Fullerton, at Long Beach. Anyway, so we get to 2000, and by this time, I'm a writer. I had done other things, and I'd become a writer, and I was with Street Zebra magazine, and I decided to do a story, and I call it A Tale of Two Pitchers. And this is an interesting story, Harper. It was about two left-handed All-American pitchers at the University of Southern California. One is the man we're talking to right now, Bill Bordley. The other was a guy that you may not have ever heard of. And it's a very amazing story, but it's a story about how one guy reacts in one way and another guy reacts in another way. We know how Bill Bordley reacted to injury, how he rehabilitated himself, how he got into a new line of work, and how he became successful. Now we have another pitcher who was there in 1960. His name was Bruce Gardner. And Bruce Gardner was as talented as Bill Bordley. He was a great left-handed pitcher. He to this day, he's the winningest pitcher in USC history, a three-time All-American, played on their national championship team, was headed to the big leagues, and like Bill, sustained an injury. He never even got to the big leagues like Bill, but because his injury prevented him from doing so. And he was out of baseball after about 3 years and struggled for about 10 years to get his life together, and he never did. And around 1970, I believe it was around 76, he went to the baseball diamond at Dado Field, surrounded the pitcher's mound with his All-American plaques and his diploma and his various awards. Put a gun out and shot himself in the head and committed suicide. So the story I did was, this character study on two left-handers. Obviously, I couldn't interview Bruce Gardner, but I was able to interview Bill Bordley. So this is how I became reacquainted my friendship with Bill. So about 3 years later, I get a phone call from Satch Hennessy. And Satch says to me, Bill Bordley's not in the College Baseball Hall of Fame. The College Baseball Hall of Fame was actually quite new. It had opened, I want to say, around 2004, 2005 in Lubbock, Texas. And Bill was not on the first couple of years. And so Satch calls me and he says, can you get Bill into the College Baseball Hall of Fame? They had given me a vote. They had read some of the articles that I had written about college baseball. So I was seen as something of a West Coast college baseball historian. And I really went to bat for Bill Bordley, and I got him onto the ballot and didn't get him into the Hall of Fame immediately. It took a couple of years, and we went roundabout, and I would call him every January. And Bill, we're close. We didn't quite get there. And so I believe it was around 2010, I want to say, that Bill gets elected to the Hall of Fame. Bill, was that the year that you went in? Can you tell me about?
No, it was 2014 was the year I was elected.
2014. Okay, I got it. My years are off. But I was very proud of my role in getting you in because you were absolutely without a doubt.
I needed all the help I could get. I only played my freshman, sophomore year. Thanks for doing that. And Satch, I maintain a great relationship for him. My son was baptized up there in Reno, and Satch was a guy. He was right there for that, so he was a godsend.
Yeah, and so this takes me to one of the greatest moments. I mean, Bill, this was beautiful. So in 2022, I get invited to be the introductory speaker of our friend Harper, a man who was on the show a few weeks back, the great Bill Spaceman Lee. Okay, and this is the USC baseball team, Coach Andy Stankiewicz, who at the time was just going into his first season. And it's a beautiful event they hold on campus. And Marcel Latchman was there. Chuck Finley was there. I believe Jim Abbott was there because he had played for Marcel in the Angels organization. A lot of my USC friends, Terry Marks, Phil Smith, and a lot of other guys were at this. It was just a magnificent event. And my friend Walt Wellsfree, and we're walking up. And there I see Bill and Anthony Munoz. And Bill recognizes me and he says, "Hey, Steve, come over here." And he shakes my hand, introduces me. He says, "Anthony, this is Steve Travers, the man who got me into the College Baseball Hall of Fame." At which point, Anthony Munoz says, "Oh, so you're Steve Travers." And I'm floating on air that Anthony Munoz recognizes me. Probably Bill had talked about me. And what makes it absolutely perfect is I had a book in my hand called Trojans Essential, which was one of the USC books that I had written. And I turned to, as a heaven sent opportunity, I turned to a chapter called Anthony Munoz Goes Hollywood. And if you've ever seen the 1984 movie The Right Stuff, about the Mercury space program, Anthony Munoz has a major role in that movie. He plays the male nurse at the hospital in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where all the pilots who are the candidates for the space program go to get tested out to see if they're eligible to become astronauts. And he had a major role in that movie, talking to Scott Glenn, who played, not John Glenn, but Scott Glenn played Alan Shepard. And there's just a fantastic scene. So I show this and I sign it to Anthony, and I have photos of Bill, Anthony, myself, and Walt Wellsfree. And my God, thank you so much for just that introduction that day, Bill. It was one of the great days of my life. And then later on, I do the introduction for Bill Bordley. But man, that was a great moment, wasn't it, Bill?
No, it was. And Anthony and I have been dear friends for forever. In fact, we were going to go to the College World Series here in Omaha if USC progressed. I talked to him last week. We were going to go and do that. But he's doing great, and he's another guy who made the transitions really well. He was an outstanding commentator for NFL football on those games, but he gave it up because of his family growing up, and he wanted to be home with them. But Anthony's as humble as they come. And who's that guy? Who's that linebacker from Northern California? Went to UCLA, played for Vermeer at
Robinson.
Jerry Robinson
from the Oakland Raiders out of Cardinal Newman High School.
Yeah. And I'm coming back. I was coming back from Pakistan or something. I'm dead tired, and I'm coming back on commercial flights. And we had to go from like Pakistan to Madrid to London and then all the way to LA. And I'm sleeping, and all of a sudden, about 40 of these NFL big guys, I just huge guys, get on the plane. And I'm like, all I want to do is sleep, And so I'm sitting there trying to sleep, and I wake up about 6 hours into the flight, and this big guy, who turns out to be Jerry Robinson, is right next to me. I said, well, I asked, what are all you guys doing here? And he says, well, we had to have some thing over here in Europe. We had to do some business promotion thing. So I'm talking to him, and I tell him, I say, hey, I know Anthony, And this guy was, Jerry Roberts is just a big stud guy, and you wouldn't even think about messing with this guy. And I told him about Anthony Munoz. I said, Anthony's my son's godfather, and we're dear friends. And he just stopped right there. And he says, hey, listen, as soon as Anthony Munoz gets your hands on you, you just stop, because it's over. You're going no further, And then he talked about when he was at UCLA. He said, man, they had Pat Howell, Brad Buddy, Anthony Munoz, all these big guys, and little 5'9" Charles White in the background, and they're doing student body right and left. He says there was no open space. If you want to see any space, you couldn't even see where Charles White was. He says if you wanted to see any open space at the Coliseum, you had to look straight up in the air to see it, because you weren't going to see any. Those guys were just so big and massive. But Anthony was just that big and imposing. I mean, you didn't mess with him.
Well, there's no question about that. I believe the 1979 Trojans probably were the most talented college football team of all time. They had Anthony Munoz, they had Ronnie Lott, they had Charles White, Marcus Allen, Brad Buddy, Pat Howell. I mean, I can't even name everybody. They had something like 5 pro football Hall of Famers, not to mention college football Hall of Famers. They had 2 Heisman Trophy winners. It was, and unbelievably, they did not win the national title. Somehow, some way, they managed to tie Stanford 21-21, and it was the one mark on their season that allowed the Alabama Crimson Tide, unbeaten and untied, to win the national title. But boy, that was a golden era at USC. This was right around the time that I was actually being recruited by Marcel Latchman to be a recruited walk-on. I guess I would have been your teammate. But at the last minute, I got a scholarship to the University of Nevada and did other things. But my God, I was living down there. I was going to Santa Monica College, and I was going to every USC baseball game that I could, every football game that I could, every basketball game that I could. And there was some magic on that campus.
Those were great times. And speaking of which, as you know, the Super Bowl's out there in Santa Clara this year. And Coach Robinson, I did a lot of work with the SEC stuff. He passed away, but I'm trying to put together a thing through that Sarah High School, a dinner out there during the Super Bowl honoring him, and we'll give the proceeds to St. Vincent de Paul. But Ronnie Lott played for him, as did Anthony Munoz, and the school. Tom Brady and Barry Bonds went to that same school, as did John Robinson.
Yes.
So, and Lynn Swan went to that school as
yes.
well. So, we really hope to get a big, if you know a venue up there, I know
the perfect venue.
Where?
I know the perfect venue. It's maybe 10 minutes away by car. It's Original Joe's in Daly City. It's been revamped. They under new ownership, the Dugans, who I know very, very well. In fact, John Dugan and they're very receptive to athletes. John Dugan is about 6'7", 6'8". He was a basketball star at the University of San Francisco. His family has owned all of the Joe's restaurants that were in San Jose, Daly City, San Francisco, and now they've expanded into Walnut Creek. That is absolutely the place to be. They handle banquets, and it's I can't recommend it enough. And
I'll talk to you offline when we get a chance, because I gave you all those names, and then then Ron Yeri. Then it'll be some.
Oh my God, Ron Yeri! I had a dinner with Ron Yeri, C.R. Roberts, and Jeff Briegel, and a few of my and Phil Smith, who and a couple of other of my USC friends at El Cholo's on Western Avenue. Some years ago, with a guy named Bob Case. Do you know Bob Case?
I know Bob well. He's a boxing guy. I talked to him he knows anybody and everybody on that stuff too. Yeah.
Well, Bob Case, we're going to have him on, Harper. My God, the stories. Bob Case was the next door neighbor of Rod Dado growing up in Glendale, best friends as a kid with Justin Dado. And we could tell this story later, but just really quickly, Rod got him a job with the Los Angeles Angels when they first started playing at Dodger Stadium. He became best friends with Bo Belinsky. So we've talked about him. He became a very good friend of mine because I wrote a screenplay about Bo Belinsky, who was a baseball player for the Angels some years ago. Have you ever been to Bob's house in Westlake Village and seen his, is it the greatest sports memorabilia this side of Cooperstown? Wouldn't you agree?
No, it's unbelievable. He's got the Muhammad Ali everlasting, the trunks that he signed when he fought Frazier there. I went there, he went to high school with Darrell Evans. And Darrell Evans at John Muir High School, he was like a senior when Darrell was a sophomore. And we went out there, and my God, his wife he was on the cover of Vogue magazine there and all that. I mean, he was a model and all that. But he'll probably be at this thing as well up there. So I will touch base with you on that.
I would love to attend that if there's any chance, and certainly if it's at Joe's, that's the place to be. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, but I'm hoping to get 300-400 people at the thing, and it'll be
well, I can help. I can help spread the word to the Trojan community in the Bay Area for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll take you up on that. So I really want to do it, and I was going to honor also Chris Mortensen because he was a North Torrance guy. And he passed away with ESPN, and he was a dear friend. He's a guy, when I first started making a name for myself in high school, he was the local writer for the Daily Breeze, and which was the newspaper there in the South Bay. And he and I became very, very good friends over the years. And he just
Bill,
passed.
did you ever live in Rolling Hills?
My parents moved up there when I was like 17, years of age. We moved up there. They moved from North Torrance in 1975, and they lived up there. I grew up down there in North Torrance.
So if you had played at Rolling Hills instead of Bishop Montgomery, we would have played against each other in 1976 when you were a senior and I was a junior, and I had a memorable game. I don't need to go into it because it's a bit of a story, but it was a memorable game. But I know your good friend Don Slott was the catcher for Rolling Hills, and I had to pitch against him. He was a tough out, I can tell you right now. But we managed to win that game. It was an unbelievable game. But we came this close to facing each other, except you went to the Catholic school.
Yeah, no, they won. I'm glad I did. Like I say, our program, we won it all. It was great. It's kind of hard when you go to school with somebody for 12 years to leave, and I didn't want to do that, and it worked out best for me. But yeah, Don, he was on that Southern California All-Star team that we played, and we had Alan Trammell on that team, and the North had Ricky Henderson and some other guys. So there was 2 Hall of Famers on there.
Was Ricky speaking in the third person back in those days? Bill, do you remember?
He's a legend in that stuff, but he was a hell of an athlete, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, no kidding.
I also know, Bill, you've been texting me a lot that you've been really trying to get Bill Spaceman Lee into the College Baseball Hall of Fame.
I just voted for him.
Anyone explain to me how is he not in the USC or the College Baseball Hall of Fame? I mean, for what reason?
I don't know, but he played on those same teams with Fred Lynn, and Fred's will tell you the guy could flat out pitch. If you look at that 1975 7th game World Series, he outpitched Don Gullett. I mean, he did through the one ephus pitch, but when he left the game, he had like a 3-2 lead over Gullett in the 7th or 8th inning. So by today's standard, he did what he was supposed to do. But he was a big game pitcher, and he didn't have not one pitch phenomenal, but he just knew how to pitch, and his numbers were unbelievable. And And in college, it was the same. And you know, I voted for him every year. I voted for Jim Barr, who was a teammate of mine with the Giants as well. And you know, some of these guys, I don't, like I say, your assistants helped on that, and you know, things got to work out, and I'm ever grateful for having made it. You know.
Frank Ferroni told me that when he was at the North-South All-Star game at Anaheim Stadium, I guess you had a practice before the day before, or you were there when the Angels and the Red Sox were also there. And Frank said that he met Bill Lee that day. Did you meet Bill during that period of time when you were at the North-South game?
I don't recall that. No, I don't think I would have remembered him because I would, you know, at 76, I knew who Bill Lee was. I didn't meet him there. He would come to our alumni game every 77, 78. I saw him there.
Did I introduce you to him at that event in 22, or did you know him before that?
No, I met. He played in that alumni game, and I see him and you shake hands and stuff like that. But I never had a. But we talked about. 2 months ago, he invited me to Fenway Park to watch him as he's pitching as a banana, and you know, he's 77 years of age.
He's my daughter. He's my daughter's neighbor in Vermont.
He's whose neighbor?
My daughter has
okay, yeah.
husband in Vermont, and I go back every year, and I've been to many games at Fenway Park, either with Bill or on Bill's tickets. And I went to Cooperstown with Bill and sat with Bill, Goose Gossage, and Raleigh Fingers. This is when Derek Jeter went into the Hall of Fame. I mean, what a day that was for me. Wow.
Yeah, no, Bill, his numbers are there. He definitely deserves both those places to get in there. But as does Jim Barr, and Steve Busby's up there too. But
my friend and I were going over USC players, and it was just I couldn't even keep up with it. All the players who have come out of USC and made it to the major leagues. And it's really unbelievable. Yeah, there were all these great teams. Your team in 78, which I believe personally at that point was the greatest college baseball team of all time. There's been some really super teams since then that may have surpassed it, may not. It's hard to say. The 1995 Cal State Fullerton team is one. But those teams you coached, and you talked about the talent. Randy Johnson, Mark McGuire, not to mention the catcher was a guy named Jack Del Rio. The talent on those teams that you coached around the 82, 83 period, 84, was as good as anything SC has ever had, but that team just didn't quite get over the hump. College baseball has changed. The competition is more, we've talked about this, is greater. What have you seen in college baseball in terms of the way that it's changed and what it takes to win the College World Series?
Well, not just college, but the MLB, you know, the offensive numbers, it's a whole different game. And I really have a hard time, and Darrell Evans will tell you the same, and Alan Trammell will tell you the same, the guys that you really don't watch that much anymore. It used to be you manufactured runs to win and stuff like that. And you could look at a batting average and say, hey, the guy's not cutting it. But now if a guy's hitting 210, but he's hitting home runs, everything's there, and he strikes out 40% of the time. It's just a whole different game. And, you know, baseball's in my heart and soul. It gave me everything I have today. So it'll always be a part of me. But
well, you became the security. What was your title with MLB?
I was vice president of.
Tell me about that.
Well, you know, the good thing about that, I've been out of the game. My last year was 83, and I go back in 2010, and so all the guys that I played against, whether it be Bruce Bochy or Trammell or Sosha or Kurt Gibson or you know, all the guys, Buddy Black, all these guys that you played against. but you didn't really get to talk to them that much because, you're pitching and they're hitting and you're not there to make friends. They're like competitors. But then I'd have to go in the clubhouse every year, every club in spring training to explain to them the rules about, gambling or drugs or how to stay out of trouble and what all the services we can provide. And so in that capacity, I got Clint Hurdle. You get to know these guys, and the manager knows when I got a player in trouble. I was the one getting the phone call, at 3 a.m, and so-and-so's in trouble, and you try to, you keep it out of the news as best you can and hope it goes that way. But so in that capacity, I reestablished a lot of friends. Dusty Baker, you get that. And so, and then, of course, with the internet now, I'm on a daily email with a lot of these guys, and they do have a lot of investments that they do in all parts of the world. So I'm involved in that to a degree. So that was the best thing going back, and the fact that I can keep in contact with all these guys. And Tim Leary's, and speaking of Tim Leary, he called yesterday. He just had a granddaughter that lives up in the Northern California, so six months old, and
Awesome.
And so that was the best thing about going back when I did, because I really had the opportunity to finally get to know these guys, and it's endured now. Like I say, we keep in contact regularly.
Bill, I've got to ask, if you don't mind me interrupting, since you take over with the security aspect of Major League Baseball, there's a gentleman named Dr. Boudreau that wiggled his way into football folklore as well. Did you help put Dr. Boudreau and his lovely daughter Morticia behind bars eventually? Do you know anything about that story?
I don't.
Here's a guy that okay, let's first go back into your responsibilities in the football world. During training camp, there'd be an FBI, there'd be a for me in Atlanta, it'd be a Georgia guy. Or if there was when I was in Philadelphia, it was a guy that was in the Northeast. There'd be some local police and some investigative crews that would say, all right, guys, let me stick with Philadelphia. Here's what's going on in Atlantic City right now. You got to be aware of this guy and this. There'd be some people that have been trying to approach baseball and football players. Stay away from them at all costs, all right? Because these are bad people. Is that some of what you were doing from a security standpoint, going to each club, or at least sending other people out with the message of here's the latest that you would need to know to protect yourself, protect the team, and protect the league?
Well, yeah, there was a myriad of problems. I mean, when I first got there, that Ramos guy got a kidnapping down in Venezuela, and I'd only been on the job like 2 weeks when that happened. But then, of course, you had the PED scandals and the gambling, and you got guys 25 years of age with fame and money. There's going to be problems, and
Yep.
and that's what it was. And so and then and even some of the problems they're having now. I'm doing some of this NIL stuff, but I don't know if you guys saw that thing. Who's that? McCullers, the pitcher for the Astros.
Yeah.
They made death threats against him, and he went out and gave up, like, gambling is so big now. He gave up like 1 1/3 innings, gave up 8 runs, and then this kid Mike Kelly or something for Oakland. He made some bets on the minor league, and he's been suspended for a year. And this gambling, is really not just a professional level. It's escalated to such a problem that and all the NIL background checks and things like that the schools have to do for risk management process. They got their hands full, and these problems are growing. They're not stopping, because if you're some guy at Utah State who's got 3 games left in his career, and you know that you can make $300,000 by throwing a game or something, you got no pro career. I mean, you got a whole bevy of problems looking at you.
Yep. Yeah, it seems to me, and I don't want to go down the political rabbit trail. And political, I don't mean between Democrat or Republican. I just mean it's going to be very, very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. I don't think it's going to happen. But to me, it sounds like, bang, the gun goes off. The kids are running around the track, and they go to the official, and the official says, I don't know what to tell you guys. I have no idea how long this race is going to be. So, is there any aspect of that? There aren't enough rules in place to regulate it in a manner that is efficient and fair to the most amount of people. I'm not a justice, but if you're commissioner for the day, how do you fix some of these problems, Bill? What's your advice?
Well, you're talking about MLB, or you're talking about the regulations at NIL, which were you?
Well, I'm going to blanket all of it. If you did have just for one day the ability to wave a magic wand to say, all right, here's one problem that I know that we can fix by doing this. Do you have an answer for any of that?
Well, the biggest thing that I think, I don't know why the genie got out of the bottle, is on the gambling, because it used to be, persona non grata.
Yep.
And now they got casinos at the stadiums there. I mean, they're right next to where the ball players are.
Yeah.
And it used to be we all, was it rule 27 or 21, whatever it was, every clubhouse you went into, you couldn't do that. And there's just a big problem there waiting, and that's I think they got to distance themselves more from that if they could. I mean, it might be too late now, but it's kind of hard to You got that thing with Ohtani. I mean, it was like $15-20 million coming out of his bank account, and he didn't know anything about it. What did Pete Rose said? I should have just had a handler or whatever. It's a financial advisor. They're there, those problems.
Yeah. Well, Pete, to his discredit, well deserving of being in the Hall of Fame as a player, but when the league itself establishes in every clubhouse, you are not allowed to bet on games. No gambling. It made it very simple, and it couldn't be any clearer. And Pete lied about it. It was the perjury issue as much as anything. Same with Michael Vick. Agree or disagree?
I got a funny story.
Please.
Sad in some way, but 1995 or 1994, I'm still at headquarters doing polygraphs, and there's a Secret Service agent's wife got arrested at LaGuardia Airport with like $37 million of cocaine. And the agent that she's married to is out of Miami, and he'd only been on the job 2 or 3 years. So I've got to go down and administer a polygraph exam on this guy to see if he knew anything of what his wife was doing. So I go to Reagan Airport, the flight's leaving at 7 a.m. and I'm probably there at about 4:45, and I'm just sitting there having a cup of coffee. And I look over and I see this guy, and there's only like 5 or 10 people at the terminal, at the gate here. And I look over and I see this guy wearing a hat that says Hit King on it. And I look and I said, oh my God, it's Pete Rose. So I go over there and I start talking to him. And it was a Tuesday in like November. And if you check the 1994 schedule, the Packers were playing the San Francisco 49ers. And it was after Monday Night Football. And I go up to him, hey, Pete, how you doing? I can say Cincinnati drafted me, so we knew of each other a little bit. And we talking. And he'd already been to prison for this. But he says, did you see that game last night? I said, well, he says, the Monday Night Football game, he had the over 42, and at halftime it was 35-3, and it ended 38-3. So he lost by 1 point, and that's all he was complaining about. And, and we sat there and we talked for like an hour and a half on the gamble, and it wasn't just gambling, but I mean, the guy, he's like that movie Rain Man. He knows everything about baseball. We must have gone over every baseball player back to the 1960s, And so then we get on the plane, and there's only like 20, 30 people getting on this plane to go down to Florida. And he says, where are you sitting? I said, well, I'm in the back here. He's like, I'll sit with you. So he sits with me. And then the captain of the airlines comes on. He comes back to the plane. And he starts talking to Mr. Rose, and, and he's really impeached there. Yeah. And then I said to the captain, I said, you realize that this row here has 4,257 big league hits between us. Pete looked at me like, no, I only had 456. I said, no, let it go, Yeah. But he had a problem, and that's what. They're just, it's like drinking alcohol a drink to an alcoholic. I mean, I think they should be distancing themselves more from that. I don't know how to do it. It's everywhere. It's on the internet. Guys are showing up, fans are sitting in the stands yelling at the bullpen over, hey, you should have had 5 strikeouts because your over under was 4.5, or, it's terrible. And I think you're going to see, I know the stuff I'm doing now, they want a lot of checks on this stuff. And
speaking of, Bill, why don't you talk a little bit about what you are doing now? I know you sent me some information. Why don't you give us a little update on that?
Well, I do a lot of the, these guys, they have a lot of financial investments, and they want to know about the international background that I have, and they want it, kind of confidential. But I do checks on a lot of them. I kind of pick my stuff now because I'm 67, and my son and I, we just traveled over to Turkey and Croatia doing some of this stuff when we stopped over there. But my son speaks Russian, so I'm trying to get him. He's going to be a part of the company as it expands, and he's pretty good at that stuff. So, and as you can tell, he helps on my computer stuff too. But,
good job, Bill. Billy.
Yeah, but I do that, and I work a lot with these SEC things. Coach Robinson was down there at LSU with Ed Orgeron, and then the money. They get 10, 15,000 people at all their baseball games down there. Their baseball security package is more than their football. I mean, because they got 45 home games, and they draw. And it's not just LSU; it's the whole SEC conference. And the money, like this Paul Skeen's kid. I mean, he was a Southern California guy. In the old day, he would have been at USC, and he went to LSU, and they gave him mid-7 figures, just bonuses and stuff. So that's where the money is. And so it's a lot of risk management. I give seminars to the schools about, what signs to look for. What are some of the indicators as to that? And most of it's with the coaches and the athletic directors. I stay away from the players, and I make sure they don't have cameras in the seminars that I have, because now it goes everywhere, and it's kind of confidential stuff. But that's what I'm doing. And then every year I do a Super Bowl with Anthony and spring training. We're going to be doing something down there. Steve, I know you did some stuff on the Republican side way back in the day, didn't you?
I have been involved. I was once being groomed to run for Congress in the 38th Congressional District, which just straddles Orange and Los Angeles counties, but didn't quite work out.
Well, after you give us the host of the San Francisco thing, you can put your cleats on and go down to Arizona, and we're going to do something there. In spring training, you got Bob.
Are you asking me to pitch?
No, not pitch. No. Same here. I can throw the ball 40 feet anymore with this arm.
Neither can I.
But we're going to have a dinner down there too, and that'll be good. I would love to be involved in that, and especially that dinner you're working on near the San Mateo Daly City area. And as you know, it's a lot of work. And what do we do in the early June here? You put in the calls, but you got to make those things go. But it should be fun. It's great to see all those guys at great causes, and it's really something you look forward to every year. The last time they had the Super Bowl in San Francisco, Anthony Munoz and I went to what's that Irish restaurant there?
Lefty O'Doul's?
Lefty O'Doul's, yeah. And we're coming back from there to the hotel, and this Brinks truck comes up, and all of a sudden the back of the Brinks truck opens up, and these guys with full armor had to go running into the bank with the money bags and everything. And Anthony, we're a little more than 10 feet from him, and you can't even see these guys. And one of them yells out, "Munoz, how you doing?" I was like, But,
the Lefty O'Doul's. Speaking, I've done several book signings at the old Lefty O'Doul's. Are you talking about the one that was in downtown, or the one over by Fisherman's Wharf?
No, it was downtown. And
that was probably 15 years ago, at least.
Yeah, it was whenever the last Super Bowl was in that was close to maybe 10 to 15 years, something like that.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, I know that unfortunately they shut down and then they opened a new one, and they had some sort of problem with the ownership. But that was a great sports bar back in the day. That was really the original Lefty O'Doul, who, I don't know if you know this, Bill, but Lefty O'Doul was the man who Doug MacArthur said did more to restore Japanese-American relations after World War II than any person, because he had organized a number of exhibitions of American baseball in Japan in the 30s. We're talking Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. And after the war, he did it again. He came back, and the Japanese were despondent, and he would show up and bring them back through baseball. And MacArthur said baseball did more to restore the order and the morale in Japan than any single factor. And he said Lefty O'Doul was the main guy behind that.
Wow. Yeah, no. Japanese and baseball, the cultures are so intertwined. It's unbelievable,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly been an important part of your life as well. Do you think that baseball, maybe not necessarily the discipline, but just the ability to be able to play and to create the confidence that you had, that it did in you and with so many others, helped to lead to other aspects of what you were able to do, obviously from a Secret Service, and then your security staff with Major League Baseball, the connections, the ability to take one thing from another, you're pushing yourself to the limit in so many different ways?
Well, there's no doubt that the lessons of sports, and I've told my son this too, and he's into boxing and he's trained so hard, and he's in phenomenal shape, and I say to him, the lessons that you learn from sports will be with you your whole life. And believe me, going back to school, getting A's and stuff like that, it's just a question of putting the time in, and that's what it is. And the discipline that you learn from, going through injuries and rehab and being a part of a sports environment, it's crucial. And it gave me the backbone as to do anything in life. I mean, you can, one thing from my playing career, you can look back and say, it's not that I didn't try hard enough, and sports teaches you that. It gives you that you can't quit. I mean, how many times you go out to practice, you didn't want to be there. I mean, hey, here we go. And sports teaches you that, and it teaches you. It was a great foundation in life, and yeah, that has helped me in all my assignments, whether it's in my business here now, my company, or Secret Service or MLB, whatever it is. I mean, it's just you have to have a can-do at it, like Rod Data. Wake up, get up, and get going. If you learn those three things, you'll be all right.
They say that the hardest thing in sports is to hit a ball that's moving at 50, 70, 80, 95 miles an hour. I would imagine it's also incredibly difficult to be on the mound, and you and Steven both know this, to get the guy out whose job is to be able to hit the ball at 90, 95 miles an hour. Be able to outsmart that, the savviness, the competitiveness, I can do this. Even if I give up, I'm going to get the next guy up. There's so many different aspects of what you just said there, Bill, that are applicable just not only on the mound or on a field, but when you go into other parts of your life, the confidence to be able to say, I don't care what we're doing right now. I can do this. I can make this sale. I can fix this machine that needs to be fixed. I can win this war. I can do things, right? There's so many different aspects of the way that you conduct yourself from an athlete into how you can conduct yourself as a pro in any other aspect of your life.
Yeah, and from a baseball perspective, and Steve knows this too. I mean, when you go from high school and nobody probably even hits a home run off you, and then you get into college and they start hitting, and your ability, you got to bounce back and do that. And you win some of the games. The best games you win is after you gave up some monstrous hits or whatever. You just have to do that. But what's that? the 6 P's to success: player planning prevents piss poor performance. You just got to prepare before to do it. And sports teaches you that. I mean, if you didn't come out on that national championship team at SC, and if you didn't come out there giving your best at practice, it wouldn't have been Coach Dado jumping on you. It's your fellow teammates, And we were fortunate on that team at SC. We had senior leadership. And Coach was a great coach, but he was pushing 65 years of age when I was there. And he had a lot of skills that he brought to the table that we greatly needed when we got to Omaha. But we were fortunate that we had seniors like Tim Tolman and Dave Hostetler and Doug Stokey who kept us all in line. And sports teaches you that.
Hey, let me ask you, you mentioned Omaha, and I think Harper, a couple weeks back, you were asking about where to go in Omaha. And it occurs to me that I forgot to mention a great restaurant. Bill, have you ever been to the Drover in Omaha?
No, I think the one I remember, when we went was Big Steve's or something like that. We used to go there all the time, but I've never.
I went with Frank Ferroni, Dave Weatherman, and George Horton, the assistant coach under Augie Garrido at Fullerton, was hosting a great event at the Drover. And so we were there with a lot of these Fullerton guys. And of course, Dave and Frank were in their element, and I was just happy to be there. But I just wondered if you'd ever, it's a great restaurant.
No, when I was back there in I think 2017, because President H.W. Bush played there in 1947. So they were doing a ceremony for the 70th anniversary of George H.W. Bush. They were doing a thing on that, and he was pretty much incapacitated. So W. Bush stepped in on that. But Augie Garrido was there, and George Horton, and they were running we stayed at the hotel right out there in center field, and then Augie was conducting court there and they had a lot of the Fullerton guys there. Yeah, but that's just a great venue. I wish SC could have made it this year, and I would have looked forward to being there.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to be there 2 years ago. It was probably the best sporting event I've ever attended.
Yeah. No, and then Dave Weatherman will probably tell you the same. I'm still kind of partial to Rosenblatt Stadium. There was just a kind of a magical sense to that field. And and I remember we played a Japan USA series after that. And I felt like I was like doing something wrong playing in that thing when it wasn't for the College World Series. It's just great memories. And, that was a fun 2 weeks back there.
Bill, we don't want to let you go before I want to ask you real quick. Do you remember your first major league game that you went to? Do you know how old you were? Were you with your dad? Did you go with some friends? What was that experience?
Well, you know what? I didn't go to the first one. I grew up in LA, and you remember Sandy Koufax was the big guy there. And I bet you I was only about 7. And it wasn't a game, but the Dodgers were putting out something where they were doing inter batting practice with their own team, like the Dodgers were doing inter squad. And one of the guys in the neighborhood's dad, he had like 4 kids, and we got like 3 cars, and there was like 12 of us, and we got to get in there free admission. And we were sitting there and we watched that, and they were announcing, and one of the guys, I always remember the name, Al Ferrara, because they had a
great friend of Bob Case.
Yeah, he is, and I'd never, and I was only 7 years old, and I kept hearing the name Al Ferrara batting, and I said, "Wow!" And then through Bob Case about 3 years ago, he introduced me to Al, and they call him the Bull Ferrara. He's a big, strong New York guy, but I said to him, "Man, that's where I remember the name."
Well, when Bill was at USC during those years, the Dodgers would play the Trojans in February before the Dodgers would go to spring training. And there were 50,000 people at Dodger Stadium for those games. I remember that well. I remember going with my dad. I think there were about 35 or 40,000 the day I went. And I remember seeing Jimmy Connor play. And Bill, you were not on that team. I think this was 79, but that was a big event, and it's really unfortunate that they stopped doing that around 87 or 88. Why they did that, I don't know.
Yeah. Now, do you live in Northern Cal now, right? Steve,
Yes.
are you still up there? I'm putting together and I'm getting together. It's starting to get some traction, but when I played, we were fortunate to play the CIF championship at Dodger Stadium. And they either played it at Dodger Stadium or Anaheim Stadium. And the city championship, that's where Saberhagen and those guys would always be at Dodger Stadium. But now they don't play the CIF championship at Dodger Stadium. It's at Fullerton. And I know Fullerton's got a great program and all, but it's not Dodger Stadium. And we're getting together with my old high school coach there. And you're getting a lot of guys who played in the CIF, Darrell Evans, Trammell. We're all going to try and stir up the ability to get a CIF championship back at Dodger Stadium or Anaheim. Because that's for a high school kid, to play there when you're in high school is just unbelievable. So we're working on that one.
Yeah. Well,
from high school.
I covered some of those games when I was with Street Zebra and also the LA Times high school championships at Dodger Stadium, and they were wonderful events. And you had mentioned Al Endress, my high school coach. He was instrumental. There was always, as Harper and you both were in the CIF Southern section. And that's a huge section. And that was really the only section that there was. I think there was a San Diego section. And then all the other sections came into being around 1974. And my coach, Al Endress, was instrumental in creating the North Coast section. And he had a previous Tournament of Champions that he had to agree to stop the Tournament of Champions and to create the NCS. And he said at the time he did it only because they promised that they'd create a state championship. They don't have a state championship high school baseball game in the state of California. They have it in basketball and they have it in football. And I'd really love to see, you could play to Dodger Stadium, you could play wherever you think is appropriate, but that would really be fantastic.
Yeah, I was thinking about that just the other day, but I was thinking, we were so fortunate to have won. And if you play so many more games, say we won the Southern here and we play the North and you lose that, it kind of takes the luster off them.
That's the way it is now. I mean,
I know, but
you have to win 5 games to win the college football title. You've got to go through 2 regionals just to get to the CWS.
Yes, so. It's I don't know. We had to win. We had to win 5 games to win the CIF there. I'd say, God, imagine if we went and played the North and God forbid we lost. You're saying it kind of ruins the whole season. Can't be national champions.
Yeah, well, you're right about that.
All right, guys.
Well, Bill, you've been a fantastic guest. We appreciate the time that you've given us. Steven, thank you so much for being able to put this together. See if I'm missing anything. College Football Hall of Fame or College Baseball Hall of Famer, please forgive me. National championship at the collegiate level. You were a first rounder. You're a Secret Service agent with a presidential detail and a presidential daughter as well. You've been in charge of security for Major League Baseball. You have your own company now. What else is left for you, Bill? I mean, as I mentioned at the offset, I go, your tombstone is going to have a roll of brawny paper towels. Your resume is as complete as anything that anyone would ever want it to be.
Well, the only thing I can say is I'm a Catholic. I go to daily mass, and it's the most important thing. I'm raising a 21-year-old kid, and I'm fortunate I can spend the time with him now, and that's what's most important. But I do. Life's been a lot of great memories. Saw the world, and but that's where these are the best years of my life right now. I'm telling you right now, it's a lot of work. These kids in this age group, as opposed to what we went through, it's a completely different scenario. But I enjoy doing it, and it's what the whole purpose is, because eternity is a long time, So,
Bill, I tell you what, we're going to send you off. We'll make one last thing I want to. Harper was talking about your resume. You're also in the USC Athletics Hall of Fame, so we're going to give you a little send off here, and here it is.
With the standard salute, Bill. Oh, there, yeah.
Great point.
Steven,
Okay.
Steven,
Yes, sir.
aren't you glad that you didn't have to play the UCLA fight song for Bill? Isn't that the best part of doing that? Is that you don't have to play dun dun dun, that little. We're going to the circus, and it's a 3-ring thing. Come on now, that's
UCLA fight.
how do you not walk out onto a field and just give everything you got after you hear Dr. Arthur C. Bartner and the University of Southern California Trojan marching band?
Well, I tell you, from my standpoint, I was the football team definitely excited me and made me want to be a Trojan. But this man we're looking at right here, Bill Bordley, when I got a hold of who this guy was and saw how good he was, and he was a baseball player, and that's my sport, boy, it just fired me up. So I'm fired up to become your friend and to have had you as a guest on Take 5 with Steven Travers and Harper. It doesn't get any better than this.
No
Right
kidding.
on.
Any last words, Bill? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Steve, you better, those words are going to be put into action, because you may be seeing a lot of me in the Bay Area here, and I may be leaning on your local knowledge up there to put these things together. So,
Well, you have a place to stay here as well. Anytime you want to come on up.
you get a venue, and you'll get a lot of the giant. I know Daryl Evans is coming out there, and we'll have a lot of giant guys there, and a lot of those Sarah guys there, and you with your USC, you may be the MC of the darn thing, because you got Coach Orgeron will be there, and John Robinson's family.
What? Speaking of my being an MC, I emceed an event, a Marin County Hall of Fame event, and I sent it to Dave Weatherman, and Weatherman goes, "You were born to do that." So,
yeah. Well,
all right, my friend. Thank you
Golden
so
Throat. We'll get you ready.
God bless you and fun.
Well, folks, they're wheeling and dealing, and we may have to have another show just to figure out what was going on after we're done with taping this, and the ability for them to put together the Super Bowl benefit, the dinner that's going to be taking place. We'll want to know more about it, so we'll have to follow up with this. We certainly will. So, Steven, thank you so much for being part of the show today and bringing Bill Bordley on. Obviously, a great American. We appreciate having him on. So for Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, I'm Harper LeBel. Bill Bordley has been our special guest, and we have all been doing it here today with Take 5, the show that we have with Steven Travers. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football. We appreciate your participation. Have a fantastic rest of your day.